One day after school when I was 6, I was digging in the sandbox and I dug up an old airplane. It was a P-51 Mustang. It was missing the canopy and the propeller, but I instantly fell in love with it. On the walk home, that airplane flew through the trees and over the fences. It flew through the grass and it even crashed a couple times. The next day before school, I decided I was going to fix the missing propeller. I borrowed my dad's utility knife and I took a popsicle stick out of the drawer. I was going to carve the propeller out of that popsicle stick. The first time I pushed the knife into the stick though, it slipped out and it hit me in the thumb and it cut me the entire length of my thumb. I briefly weighed how I could fix this without telling my mom, and I decided that I was going to have to tell her. So I went into the house and I showed her my thumb. At first she thought I'd cut it off, but then she patched it up with a little bit of gauze and white tape and she sent me to school. Every once in a while I take a look at this old scar and I think about that airplane, and I don't know what it was about it, but just how much I loved it. A few years ago I bought this 109 lathe. It was on eBay and I was scrolling through looking at parts for my Atlas and it came up. And just like that old P-51 Mustang I dug out of the sandbox, something about this caught my eye and I just immediately fell in love with it. In today's video, we're going to take this old lathe apart. We're going to see if we can get it to work again. If that interests you, let's get started. Just like that old plane, this seems to be in good shape and fairly complete. The parts it is missing should be easy to make. The plan here is to do as you've seen me do before. Fully disassemble the lathe, check the condition of all the parts, and note anything that needs repair or missing. I was really glad to see that the die-cast change gears are in good shape. They sell for a ton of money and I don't want to have to replace them. This lathe unfortunately is geared awfully high. I've seen people use 3D printed change gears, so I may try that later. The lead screw did give me some grief coming out. It doesn't have bushings, it just rides on the cast iron. It had developed some rust rings and I had to drive it out with a hammer. I'm glad to see though that other than being rusty, it's in good shape. There's not a lot of wear on the threads. The headstock looks to be in good shape and complete, which is good news. I didn't find anything missing or anything broken. The headstock on this lathe uses plain bronze bushings. It appears that the far side bushing has been replaced. Whoever did it, they forgot to drill out the oil hole. Both bushings are in good shape. There's not a lot of wear there, so I'm just going to reuse them. I wanted to preserve and reuse the original trim and the original info plates, so I was really careful with those. They're held in place with some hammer-in rivets. I was able to get a pair of vice grips on the head of those and pull them out. The bed seems to be in good shape despite being rusty. It does look like there's some gouging on the ways. I think I can live with it though. I used a cut brush and the angle grinder to remove the rust and the old paint from the casting. I learned a long time ago not to run a wire brush on a machined cast iron surface. It can dig holes, put scratches in the surface, so I didn't run the wire brush down the ways. Instead, I cleaned those up with a Scotch-Brite pad and some WD-40. That actually worked really well. I masked up the machined surfaces using the method we all do, and then I gave the bed 2 coats of gold paint. The color match with the original paint is really bad, but I quite like the look of this gold color. I soaked the headstock in the parts washer overnight. I had to do it that way to remove the 70 years of grease and chips that had built up inside it. I cleaned up all the hardware on the wire brush. This was time consuming, but it really did a good job. There is still rust in the areas the brush couldn't reach, so to get that off, I soaked them in phosphoric acid. One thing to note, if you're doing this, phosphoric acid and zinc, they do not get along. The phosphoric acid will eat the zinc. So definitely don't put your change gears into that phosphoric acid. It'll destroy them. I did this same approach over and over for all the parts until everything was clean and painted. The far side spindle bushing looks to have been replaced, and Whoever did it forgot to drill out the oil hole. I used an 1/8 inch bit and I drilled a new oil hole. I then pressed the bushing back into the housing. All of the parts for the spindle were in good shape and cleaned up nicely. This is also good news, as the planetary assembly for this is obscenely expensive. I used some double-sided tape to help hold the trim on. I lined it up, pushed it down, and then held it in place with some hammer and rivets. I'm using Mobile Velicite oil number 10 for the spindle oil. It comes highly recommended on internet forums. I already had it on hand for the mill port, which makes things easy. I lubricated the lead screw with some whey oil and I slid it into place. It's held in place by the gear on the dry side and by the knob on the far side. It spins much better now without all the rust on it. The only problem I had with the change gears, aside from being geared too high, is free play. I did have to shim them for proper alignment. A few brass shimming washers though, that did the trick. I wanted to make sure everything worked, so I drove the lathe with a drill and checked it out. Everything works as it should. The lathe came with a drill chuck. I wanted to install a 3-jaw, so I pulled the chuck and I installed a back plate. I'll have to turn this down to size later before I can install the chuck. I finished the main assembly by stoning the ways. I did this to remove any high spots from dings or gouges. It definitely needed it. You could feel just how rough it was through the stone. I did the carriage the same way. I fully disassembled it, I cleaned it, I painted it, and I put it back together. When I installed the knob for the cross slide, I noticed it didn't spin squarely. I realized that it had been incorrectly made at an angle. I used an end mill in the mill and I recut the face of it so that it was square. The handle for the cross slide was missing one of its jam nuts. I didn't have any 5/16 24 nuts, but I did have some 5/16 18 and a 24 tap. It's not ideal, but it'll work. I recut the threads, then I used the mill to reduce the thickness. I lubricated everything with whey oil and I put the carriage back together. I was able to adjust the gibs to get nice smooth movement without any free play. I was also missing the adjustment screws for the saddle. I cut down a 1/4 20 bolt. I slotted it with a hacksaw so I could turn it with a screwdriver. I installed it and I adjusted the free play. It took some trial and error, but I was eventually able to get smooth movement of the carriage with minimal free play. I didn't have table space for the 109 lathe, but I did have a stand I'd made for my mini lathe and I thought that'd work. I planned to install the motor on the back side of the headstock. I fabricated a custom hinge and mount to support the motor. The hinge will allow me to adjust belt tension. This design uses a bolt and a pair of lock nuts to hold the motor in place. To accommodate the curved motion of the belt when tightened, I slotted a pair of 5/16 inch plates in the mill, then I tacked and welded those in place. While I had the welder out, I went ahead and I welded the VFD stock in place. This will hold the motor controls and give me a place to route the wires. I installed the motor, then I used a laser level to align the belt and figure out where to mount the lathe. I used the mag drill to drill 3 5/16 inch mounting holes, then I bolted the lathe to the table. I installed the belt and then I used the new adjustment bolt to set and hold the tension. This is the VFD and switch that were on my old homemade drill press mill. I don't need them for that anymore, so I'm going to use them on this lathe. I wired an on-off switch and ran a wire from there to the VFD. That supplies the VFD with 240 volt single phase. The VFD then converts it to 240 volt 3-phase to drive the motor. With the wiring done and everything put back together, the lathe is ready to test. Everything seems to work well. Belt alignment is good, the VFD controls the motor speed as it should, and the gears drive the lead screw without too much noise. The carriage moves smoothly along the bed and the spindle spins smoothly and without play. I now have a working lathe. I celebrated this success with a fresh coat of gray Rust-Oleum paint on the table. The chuck backplate comes oversized and must be turned to fit the chuck. Before I could do that though, I needed a tool post. I'm using a cheap quick change post that I bought online. No surface on this thing was flat, so the first thing I did was square it up in the middle. I made a T-slot adapter to fit the 109 tool post. Then I cut down a 3/8 inch bolt to act as a mounting stud. The only flange nut I had on hand was serrated, so I put that in the mill and I cut it smooth. This quick change tool post is usable and it will work for now, but it's really poorly made and I do eventually want to replace it. Once I had a tool post, I could finally cut the back plate. I got quite a bit of chatter, which I'll worry about later. But I was able to get the dimensions close enough for a good fit with the chuck. I mounted a 3/8 inch ground rod in the chuck. Here's a look at the run out when it's spinning. It's not perfect, but I think it's good enough. It was at this point that I realized something was missing. We don't have a tailstock. I found it hiding under my bench. I fully disassembled it, cleaned everything up, and gave it a coat of paint. I put it back together, made sure everything worked, and bolted it to the ways. I gave it a shot of whey oil for good measure, and I tried it out. It's nice, it's smooth, it's tight, it works just like it should now. So with all that work done, I now have a working Craftsman 109 lathe. I'm really proud of the result. Despite how it looked when we started, this little lathe was actually in pretty good shape. I don't think it saw a lot of use. I decided to make its first chips on some hardware store aluminum rod. I quickly realized the lead screw is just turning too fast. For now, I disconnected the lead screw, installed a better knob on the end, and moved it by hand. It is much better to use manually. I had an idea for this aluminum rod and used the lathe to freehand a cone. The profile of this cone is not critical, so this worked. I finished with a bit of sanding to contour and smooth the surface. I'm impressed by how well this lathe did. It needs some adjustment here and there, but it works. This lathe comes from a time when people made things themselves, a time when you couldn't just buy everything you wanted with your fingertips. If you needed a new part for the lawnmower or a new knob for the coffee pot, you made it yourself. These machines enabled an entire generation of people to make things, and they inspired the next generation of machinists, mechanics, and engineers. These machines were simple to use, easy to work on, and built to last a lifetime. I really enjoyed bringing this one back to life. I think these old machines are worth saving, and I think it's worth learning how to use them. This one's going to make a great addition to my workshop. I can imagine it's going to make hundreds of bicycle parts. I hope you enjoyed watching today's video. I hope some of my admiration for these old machines rubbed off on you. So that's it for today's video. Until next time, I'll see you guys later.